Good afternoon. We apologize, first of all, for the extensive technical difficulties today. There were some problems with the Wi-Fi and the camera and everything, but I'm glad you're all joining us, and let's get this thing started for sure. So, like I said, good afternoon. Thank you all for taking some time out of your Mondays to join us for MP Shaun Chen's virtual Asian Heritage Month celebration. My name is Liam, and I'm going to be your moderator today. Asian Heritage Month is a time where we recognize the immense contributions of Asian Canadians and celebrate their rich and diverse cultures and history. While the COVID-19 pandemic has restricted our ability to celebrate in person, this month, let's take time to learn about the many different Asian cultures and communities through art, film, literature, and beyond. We're going to start with a public service announcement from the Chinese Canadian National Council for Social Justice, calling on allies to confront the historical and present injustices facing our communities.
We have never been that actions speak louder than words, so we learn to keep our heads down, keep our grades up, keep our kin close, keep our mouths shut. I wonder what it does to a people when they stay quiet for so long. Do they forget their voice? The sound of their stories, the resilience of language? When you are no longer in your motherland, does your mother tongue still sing of home? What work songs lifted our spirits as we built the railroad? What prayers did we whisper as they sent us to camps in the mountains to meditate on all the ways we don't belong to this country? So we stayed quiet. As they burned our Chinatowns down and spit on our grandmas at bus stops, we stayed quiet. As they laughed in our faces and told us to go back where we came from, but they've mistaken our silence for compliance. Looked on our meekness as weakness. See, we, and not the submissive stereotype that's been depicted on silence, on us, they've gotten it twisted. See, silence is golden, as are we. A gradient of yellow to brown, every Koreatown a little Saigon in active defiance. Every hunchback elder a humble giant. Silence is grace in the triumph, is peace in the riot. Silence is bold, a force. It is the brewing calm before the coming storm, and now the sky is splitting open and the rage is pouring forth, so this is for every kid who has ever tried to pull their nose bridge to make it taller. Every time they mocked us because our eyes are smaller. This is for our elders, both alive and remembered, for their lessons, the tough and the tender. For our full names, past and present, may they be pronounced, may they be respected. For every chink in the national fabric, every nip in the winter wind of prairie towns and northern hamlets, coast to coast on stolen land. We are here. We've been here. From takeout joints and internment camps to internships and graduation caps, we are strong. We have pride. We fight. We fall. We rise. The ones who say we don't belong, it's them who should open their eyes.
Thank you very much to the CCNC for that announcement. I'm sure many of us have watched that video before, but it's emotional every time. So thank you for that wonderful group for that announcement. It is now my pleasure to introduce your Member of Parliament, who has worked so hard to put this event together, and for our Scarborough North community, Mr. Shaun Chen.
Thank you so much, Liam, for that very kind introduction. And isn't Liam doing a fantastic job? Liam was involved, in fact, in the Asian Gold Ribbon campaign, and you see Liam wearing that ribbon very proudly, as am I. And I just want to say thank you first and foremost for Liam for emceeing our event today. And I want to thank all of you for joining all of us here today for this virtual celebration of Asian Heritage Month. Every year we host an Asian Heritage Month event here in Scarborough North. And this year, of course, as with many of our other events, we have gone virtual. I'd like to take a moment first and foremost, as always, to acknowledge and recognize that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Most recently, we have also learned of the heartbreaking news of 215 bodies of children being found around the Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia. In recognition of those 215 lives lost, the Prime Minister announced yesterday that the Canadian flag is being flown at half-mast on all federal buildings. Our hearts break for the families and communities impacted by this tragic news. We know that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission brought to light many truths about Canadian history and what took place at residential schools. And once we know these truths, we cannot unknow them. We are working with the First Nations and our partners, such as the First Nations BC Health Authority, to provide resources and support to those in the community. For assistance for those who may need it, the National Indian Residential School Crisis Line is available 24 hours a day at 1-866-925-4419. The National Residential School Student Death Register has already been launched, and through Budget 2019, our government announced funding to support the establishment of a national strategy to respond to the missing children and burial information calls to action. We will continue to engage with communities to develop culturally appropriate approaches to identifying the deceased children, locating burial sites, and commemorating and memorializing those who died or went missing while attending residential schools. In honor of the 215 Indigenous children who never made it home to their families, I would like to, all of us, take a moment for a moment of silence to honor their memory. And I would ask you now to please join me for a moment of silence. Thank you. Now, as you all know, Asian Heritage Month is the month of May in Canada. It is a time for all of us to reflect on, to celebrate the incredible contributions that Canadians of Asian descent have made and continue to make to the growth and prosperity of Canada. Almost half of the immigrant population in Canada was born in Asia, the majority of which includes China, India, and the Philippines. Representing many cultures, languages, and nationalities, the Asian community in Canada is as large as it is diverse. Immigrants have built businesses, they have raised children, they have contributed immensely to the cultural landscape of our country, and that includes many of Asian descent. As a very proud Canadian of Chinese descent and Indian heritage, my story is not unlike many of yours. I was born in Toronto. I grew up in Scarborough, the child of immigrants who came to this country with virtually no money in their pockets. Through hard work, determination, perseverance, my parents were able to build a life for themselves and for our family, not just so that we could survive, but thrive. This year, our Asian Heritage Month theme is recognition, resilience, and resolve, which reflects the myriad of sentiments of peoples of Asian descent in Canada during this time. Each word in this theme highlights a specific step and action that guides us as Canadians, encouraging us to work together to address the issue of increasing anti-Asian racism. We recognize the contributions of Asian peoples in this country, the work they have done to shape Canada, the Canada of the past, the Canada of today, and the Canada of tomorrow. We celebrate the resilience of Asian communities. In the face of adversity, in the face of discriminatory laws that they have faced in Canada's history, and the resilience they demonstrate today in combating challenges that they face. And lastly, but very importantly, we resolve to step up to be allies as communities in this country, to stand together against xenophobia, racism, discrimination, and hate in all its forms. It is truly up to each and every one of us to take a stand. And during this month, we acknowledge that increasing anti-Asian racism that we have seen over this past year during the COVID-19 pandemic. And together, we must put a strong message that any form of racism, xenophobia, fear, and hatred is unacceptable. We need to look out and take care of one another, especially those that are most vulnerable. We need to value each other and celebrate the differences and the diversity that makes Canada so incredibly strong. Today, I am very much looking forward to courageous conversations, meaningful dialogue about Asian heritage. And we're focused on the rising anti-Asian racism that have been experienced by Asian communities, by all Asian communities, but in particular, East Asian communities, with the 4 panelists that we have today. And we will hear from them later, but I would like to mention them at this point. Angela Chan, President of the Chinese Cultural Centre of Greater Toronto, and Alan Lam, Chairman of the Chinese Cultural Centre of Greater Toronto, an institution that serves the GTA but is located right here in our Scarborough North community. We also have Andi Shi, Executive Director of CPAC, and Dr. Joseph Wong, my mentor. He is the founder and chair emeritus of Yee Hong Centre for Geriatric Care, which is of course across the GTA, but also is headquartered right here in Scarborough North. These individuals have been working along with their organizations as community leaders in the fight against COVID-19 and as well in the fight against anti-Asian racism. It is so important that they continue their work, and we look forward to hearing from them today. Now I will pass it on back to Liam to introduce the next component of today's event. Thank you, Liam.
Thank you, MP Chen. And I think we all really appreciate what you said about the government's work on the recent developments in Kamloops and also on anti-Asian and hate. It's extremely important, and we thank you for that. I would now like to invite everyone to join us for our next performance by Starlight Chinese opera called Scramble for Umbrella. The piece is about the King's Secretary's daughter being lost and separated from her mother during the war. During her journey, she meets a scholar who helps her. They encounter a rainstorm and scramble for their umbrella.
萬中，更兼逢大雨，不若兩人同一傘。姑娘意下又何如呢？如何使得過？危難之中只是權宜之計啫。不如放在皮人肩上啦。相公，你是年就濕，老婆會慌濕噶。哦，多謝姑娘關心。啊！不如放在皮人嘅傘上啦。時光不早，你我立即起程而去啦。姑娘請，公請。
That was an amazing performance. Thank you for that performance from the Starlight Chinese Opera. And that's actually a great segue into our next segment, where we finally get to meet our four panelists. So let's introduce them. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Angela Chan, President of the Chinese Cultural Centre of Greater Toronto, Mr. Alan Lam, Chairman of the Chinese Cultural Centre of Greater Toronto. My apologies. Problem in the script here. Chairman of the Chinese Cultural Centre of Greater Toronto, Mr. Andi Shi, Executive Director of CPAC, and Dr. Joseph Wong, Founder and Chair Emeritus of the Yee Hong Centre. Oh, I think you might be on mute, MP Chen. Sorry, I think, sorry about this, everyone. We've been having technical difficulties all day, like I said. MP Chen, I'm not sure. I think you might be on mute here. Okay, well, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce each of the four panelists in some more depth. Mrs. Angela Chan has been volunteering with the Chinese Cultural Centre of Greater Toronto since 2000 and was invited to enter the board in 2006. Angela's detail-oriented nature and resourcefulness has led her to become the backbone of the CCC's increasingly popular events, and now the president of the board. She's interested in music and different kinds of art performance. Mr. Alan Lam is a registered professional engineer in Ontario, as well as the proprietor and chairman of Green Villa Homes. Since 2000, Alan has been part of the board of directors of the CCC and served as the chairman of the construction committee of the central building, the theater, and multi-purpose hall in phase 2. Last year, Alan was appointed as the new chairman of CCC. Congratulations to Alan. Mr. Andi Shi is the executive director of CPAC, an association of over 30,000 internally educated professionals. He has been a firm advocate for social justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and is a founding member of Asian Canadians Together to End Racism, or ACT to End Racism, a fantastic organization. It's a national coalition that was formed in April 2020 to combat the rise of anti-Asian racism. Apart from providing training and employment services to immigrant professionals, Andi is currently overseeing the production of an anti-racism educational booklet to be published in multiple Asian languages, and a research study by the newly formed CPAC think tank on Chinese representation in senior leadership roles across sectors in the GTA. And finally, but not least, Dr. Joseph Wong. In 1979, Dr. Joseph Wong led the Chinese Canadians community's protest against a CTV program that portrayed Canadian students of Chinese descent as foreigners who took university places away from Canadians. CTV later apologized, and Dr. Wong founded the Chinese Canadian National Council, a human rights group that promoted equality among all Canadians, which now has 29 chapters in different cities across Canada. Dr. Wong is the founder of Yee Hong Centre for Geriatric Care, which provides culturally appropriate services to the thousands of seniors of Chinese descent and other minority ethnic groups, and co-founder of ALPHA, the Association for Learning and Preserving the History of World War II in Asia, working with 25 to 30 other groups in the world to fight for justice for victims of crimes against humanity during World War II in Asia. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to all of our panelists.
Thank you so much, Liam, for that amazing introduction. We certainly have an amazing panel of guests today. I'll start off with Dr. Joseph Wong. Dr. Wong has, as Liam mentioned in the introduction, worked for many years on anti-Asian racism, and in 1979, as Liam mentioned, there was a program on CTV that really painted the Asian community as the perpetual foreigner. Dr. Wong, what similarities do you see, and how has the recent rise in anti-Asian racism been contributing to that myth of the perpetual foreigner?
The problem is that Chinese community somehow were never accepted as Canadians or as equal to other Canadians. That has been the case ever since Chinese set foot in Canada, long before Confederation. So it started with discrimination against the Chinese who came to North America. And then during the railway constructions, not only in Canada, but also in the States, linking the East Coast with the West Coast through the very dangerous Canadian Rockies and also the Rockies in the States to link the country together. So after the railway was completed, Chinese were not welcome. Somehow they were told to go home, but in a polite way. So they instituted a specially legislated acts to require Canadian or require Chinese immigrants from China or anywhere in the world who immigrated to Canada to pay head tax. That is the infamous Head Tax Act, which rose to $500 in 1903, which was equivalent to about the value of 2 houses at that time. For each member you brought in, you have to pay such a head tax. So this hefty tax on Chinese immigration actually prevented the Chinese community to grow in this Canadian society in the early part of the last century. And of course, the perception that Chinese somehow could not integrate, could not assimilate into the Canadian society had been there for so long. It has been deep-rooted. Somehow our skin color is yellow. If it is not white, you were not a Canadian. And that actually led to the creation or the filming of the W5 segment called Campus Giveaway, in which, Shaun, you said it right. So for Canadians of Chinese descent who were admitted to medicine, law, pharmacy, and dentistry, they were regarded as foreigners who took over the rightful places that belong to the real Canadians. Somehow we were not real Canadians. So Chinese Canadian community started to protest, and eventually, after 6 months of vigorous protest and linking up with other minorities, CTV had to apologize, not only to the Chinese Canadian community, but to Canada, to all Canadians, that they have done something very wrong. So since then, it has become a milestone for any minority fighting for its rightful place in our Canadian society. Now, this particular pandemic, it is exactly the same. As long as your skin color is yellow, doesn't matter you're Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, or other Southeast Asians, they treated you the same. You were bringing in the diseases, yellow peril, and all such things that they find Canadians of Eastern descent scapegoats for the pandemic. So it kind of reflected what we struggled, what we fought against CTV over 40 years ago. So there are very similar and parallel perceptions of Chinese Canadians. So this racism against Chinese and against other Asians is not new. Actually, it has been there even before Confederation. And I'm glad that although we suffer a lot, the community suffer a lot, not only from the pandemic, but also from the other virus, the virus of racism. We suffer so much. But on the other hand, it also brought to us, our present day Chinese Canadian, this generation and future generation, that we cannot kid ourselves. Racism is here to stay in Canada, and we have to be vigilant. We have to be more aware, and we have to work together. Bring all Chinese, bring all Asian together to fight this racism.
Dr. Wong, you said it so well, and you brought up the very important history of the community here in Canada. One of the institutions that has been working to make sure that that history is told and preserved, and that the culture and experiences of Canadians of Chinese descent in particular is the CCC. So I want to turn over to Alan Lam, Chairman of CCC, to talk about the work of the CCC, because that history, that those struggles and how the Chinese community has worked to build up this country is an important story to tell, and CCC does that every day. Alan, can you tell us a bit more about the work of CCC?
Well, thank you, Shaun, and thank you, Dr. Joseph Wong. Joseph actually had a long history of fighting this very issue for the longest time. And I think what we find that I personally somehow way back experienced somewhat the same experience that Joseph had mentioned. But being part of the CCC, we look at it the same way, but we just execute the way to tackle this problem a little bit different. But doesn't mean that we would disagree or agree. Over the last many years, or in particular, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit in early 2020, obviously that we, the Cultural Center, are very much shut down. And we were basically among ourselves were saying, what should we do to give back to the community? So rather than having people coming into our center, have our theater, conference room, and classes, and we extend our service to the community, including the seniors, the most vulnerable, the homebound seniors. But in March 2020, we find that the pandemic hit the Toronto very, very hard, by surprises indeed. And the frontline workers, the senior, the most vulnerable, a lack of PPE. So we actually were trying to give back, like all Asian, that we are a nation and we are a culture of like to give back to the society and the community. So we actually start up a 1 mask at a time in mid-March. And this particular campaign lasts about 6 weeks. And we are very fortunate that we have many supporters and donors and giving us fund, be able to collect and run around in the Metro Toronto to find PPE. So we managed to raise about $280,000 over 6 weeks' time. And we felt overwhelmed with all the supporters. And we give that not only to our people with the same color, but we actually reach out and to the frontline workers. As you know, we are community partner with the Scarborough Health Network. So we actually give half of our donation, get the PPE back to the frontline workers. So this is the beginning of the pandemic. We found that we are on the right track to tackle the most needed in the community, also to show to the general public and the community that the racism exists, but we want to deal with it on a hands-on approach. Right after the 1 mask at a time, that passed about 6 weeks in end of April, then we felt that we would need to do more. And how to do more? We have a series of programs, extended program, in like 1 meal at a time, CCC Engage, CCC Connect, which Angela could actually expand it further. So I'm going to pass it to Angela. Shaun, you've all type of it.
Yeah, before Angela, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge, because I think Alan has really said how important it is that the Chinese community has really stepped up during this pandemic. And it really juxtaposes against that narrative that this is a Chinese virus, because there's the dominant narrative that's been going around in the media, through social media, is that this is a Chinese virus, without making any distinction in terms of Canadians who are of Chinese descent. And I think that is so important for us to really highlight, because the Chinese community, along with so many other communities, I see Norma Carpio here, she's the head of the Philippine Independence Day Council, Don Ho, who is the leader of the CPAC Center, so many people, Emily Law, those of you who are some of you in this room have been so involved in collecting PPE and supporting that effort, and we need to tell that story. Angela, you led a number of initiatives, 1 mask at a time, 1 meal at a time. Why was that important for the Chinese Cultural Center to lead, to really give back and support the community during this time?
Well, during our 1 mask at a time, we found out that there are some seniors who are homebound and did not dare to go out. Since the Chinese Cultural Center has a teaching kitchen, we decided to cook some hot meals to serve them. Therefore, since June of 2020, we have started the 1 meal at a time program to serve 300 meals weekly with the support of the Emergency Community Support Fund from the federal government through the United Way. The program is continuing even now, whereby we have served over 11,000 hot meals to benefit over 2,500 seniors. And then as we move along, we also realized the homebound and isolated seniors were very lonely and with nothing to do during the lockdown period. Therefore, in August, we started the CCC Connect website, which was made possible by the ECSF program, whereby we taught seniors how to go online to watch the videos which we had prepared for them weekly. It included topics on health, exercise, art, and cooking. Due to the popularity of the CCC Connect, we followed up with another online program called CCC Engage. This program is a bit different from the CCC Connect. It's because it consists of weekly live stream classes, which involve interaction from the seniors. We are still continuing with this program. So we find these programs are important to the homebound and isolated seniors, so they do not feel they are alone, but still connected with other seniors while staying at home.
And on top of that great work, and our next panelist, I do want to highlight Andi, because Andi was part of an initiative with Dr. Wong, and this was the Stop COVID-19 Coalition. And not only did you folks raise, as Dr. Wong highlighted, so much money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to procure and purchase PPE, to distribute to the broader community, to our hospitals, to healthcare workers, you also were involved in a project to end racism. Andi, can you tell us about that initiative?
There have been so many anti-racism initiatives. You want to talk about CPAC or the Acting the Racism? So within CPAC, the biggest campaign we have organized is basically a series of webinars to talk about anti-racism. At the time, a lot of people were attacked. A lot of people were asking, what can I do? How can I respond? How can I help somebody who is being attacked? So we designed a series of this educational seminar to tell people, how can you respond? How can you support somebody else as a bystander? And what is the forms of racism? It's not just verbal attack or physical attack. There are so many other forms in our education system, in our institutions, in the workplace. We're facing a high ceiling, glass ceiling, in a bamboo ceiling in leadership positions. One of the research projects we are doing right now is to discover the low representation rate of Chinese across the board. So these are important issues in our society. We also talked about bullying, apart from the normal bullying, there's also the racial bullying in school, on the school ground. It's important that parents are equipped with this knowledge. And hate crime is something we discussed too, because there's a lack of clarity in the criminal code, and especially in the prosecution side. And there's a lack of traditional guidance on how to prosecute such crime. And there's also a lack of legislation about online hate and issues. There are so many things that we need to address. And so this is basically the main series we did at CPAC. But I was heavily involved in the Acting the Racism coalitions, Asian Canadian Together to End Racism. In March last year, when anti-Asian crime was on the rise, so a few of us across Canada decided to form this national coalition. At this point, we have over 50 organizations. So we started with people from Montreal, Calgary, Toronto, and Vancouver. We've been busy. We've been meeting every week until now. There's a lot of things to respond to. When Derek Sloan and Jason Kenney attacked Dr. Teresa Tam because she is Chinese, and we had to respond. When the Filipinos in Cargill, the workers in Calgary, were blamed by the premier for the COVID spread, and while ignoring the anti-mask demonstration, gathering from the legislature in Alberta, and that had to be addressed. And so we have done a lot of public speaking. We organized this Speak Up campaign. It's time we demand things to speak out, and also education, and for our own community to be aware of the things. So we produced literature in comic strips, and brochures, and bookmarks. There's also a reporting line set up on the website of Acting Racism, and people can report in different languages and through text and through videos. So a lot has been going on. We also did a whole series of community consultation on hate crime, on data collection, on policing, on human rights commission, on education. So we are actually producing a series of policy recommendations I've been working on these drugs for the last several weeks. In the last project we have just finished is a video series. We produced 5 little videos on modern minority, on perpetual for foreigners, the thing Dr. Wong mentioned, on yellow peril, and stereotypes. All these issues need to be addressed. So it's been a busy year, and it's been very inspiring, and we continue to work on that front.
So Andy, you've mentioned a number of very important concepts here in terms of the bamboo ceiling and the model minority. I want to acknowledge I have in the room also Sue Wong, and Sue Wong is a former MPP. She also served alongside me. We were colleagues at the Toronto District School Board as school board trustees. And one of the things that we grappled with at the TDSB was how that myth of the model minority plays out in the education system, because students of East Asian descent in particular, and South Asian descent, and certain other predominantly immigrant groups tend to perform well academically. So some have used that performance to argue that there's no racism. However, we see that when they graduate, when they go out in the workforce, they end up not being able to achieve those really higher levels of management. They don't get promoted. They hit, as Andy said, the bamboo ceiling. Dr. Wong, you've done work to support education. How do you reconcile this opposing concept of, you know, saying that our students do well and they are successful, and yet when they get out there in the real world, they face barriers to be able to achieve those high levels of success?
That's why we really should not fall into this trap. Actually, we are in the same boat as all other minorities in Canada, fighting for our rightful place in this society. So the model minority is to separate us from other people who are disadvantaged because of nationality, skin color, and other characteristics. And it is pretty a sad story that if we think that we are better than other minorities, if you think that we are the model who do not stir up trouble, I think that we are very wrong. I think the pandemic, the virus of racism, really told us the real story behind. So I founded a few organizations, many of you know. One is the Chinese Canadian National Council for Social Justice that Shaun, you just mentioned. And it is still continuing its work in this area. The 5 of us have taken up a lot of work. I took up the least, but the other members, directors, they have been very, very busy this past month of the Asian Heritage Month. So we were invited to speak to many, many different forums. And some forums are as many as over 1,000 people. So each of the directors took up 3 or 4 speaking engagements a day. It is phenomenal. We have been so busy. So we gave anti-racism workshops to the largest law firm in Canada, among the largest public sector unions and their members, schools and different organizations. We work together with Staples, Raptors, and a lot of other organizations to promote this anti-racism, anti-Asian racism work that we are working together with a lot of other organizations. On the Alpha education side, we work closely together with different school boards, educated schools, and we organize a lot of seminars for young people, and we ask the young people to speak out. We ask the young people to let us know of what they thought. So a few days ago, we organized this youth panel, which is amazing and is eye-opening, how in their mind, what they have gone through. I mean, many of them, although born in Canada, they've gone through a lot of racism in the class, outside, and in their friend circles. So we learn a lot from our own children, Chinese Canadians who were born here. And it is really important for the communities coming together, whether you are from China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, or elsewhere in the world. We are exactly in the same boat. And this racism is attacking us irrespective of where we came from. And as long as we have the color, as long as people perceive who we are, and we would be victims of our own identity. So it is very important for us to work together, and not only among Chinese Canadians and also with other minorities, because exactly that is how we should fight racism and how we could be first-class Canadians with everybody else enjoying equal rights, but also we are willing to share equal responsibility in this country.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Dr. Wong mentioned professionals. He also mentioned young people. I'm going to ask Andi and Liam actually to talk about some of the work they've done with those respective groups. Andi, CPAC was actually founded, from my understanding, with a lot of young Chinese professionals. In fact, that used to be the name. That's the C and the P from CPAC. Can you tell me, in your experience of working with so many Canadians of Asian descent who are young professionals, what are the themes? What are the dominant experiences that come out when you hear from them and their lived realities, their aspirations and the struggles that they experience?
I think there's a common phenomenon of kind of awakening among the young professionals. There are so many of us, if you have children going to school, they will see this is Canada, there's no racism. They're so proud to be Canadian. They don't want to be a Chinese Canadian or being a Filipino Canadian, they are Canadian. But as soon as they step out of school, go into the real world, in the workplace, they start noticing there are the stereotypes they have to deal with. There are certain ceilings that are fairly low, not even very high. So these are issues of people that are confronted. And for the Canadian board, it's very challenging actually. If you were coming from a different culture, you already have an identity to ground you. But if you were born or grown up in Canada in a biracial environment, it's actually more difficult to have a strong identity you can fall on. And you are constantly challenged by your peers in school, when you bring your own ethnic food. So a lot of these young people have gone through a period that, they are forced to be ashamed of their own culture, their own food, or their own language, or their own parents. And it takes them many, many years to finally gain some self-confidence to own their cultural heritage. Yes, I am a proud Asian Canadian. My culture is my strength. And that's something many of the young people are going through. And I think that's part of the work actually we need to do to help them. We are actually within CPAC talking about our next research topic. I think we could be doing something about the mental health and the psychological health of our next generation. Because in the US, there's a recent study which shows Asian Americans, young people, the #1 cause of death is suicide. And it's probably #10 for the rest of the world. That's an issue. That's probably because the racism they have gone through, the lack of confidence they have been forced to accept. And there are consequences of racism. It's tangible and intangible. These are the issues, as a community, we need to confront.
Thank you for that, and I think you've made a lot of interesting points there, Andi. I can certainly speak as a Canadian of Chinese descent and Indian heritage. First and foremost, I'll acknowledge that I never used to use that term to describe myself. When I was growing up, and people would ask me that question, "Where are you from?" First of all, I was born in Toronto, but I would always say I'm Chinese, because being Canadian did not jive with how I felt about myself because of the dominant messages in the media, in the school system, in the Canadian society that made me feel like I did not belong. And I can certainly speak to my own experiences of being afraid to bring my Chinese food into the classroom and to be able to eat my food because it looked different and it smelled different, and kids would make fun of me for that. For me, it was very interesting because when I was growing up in the 80s, and then eventually there were more Chinese immigrants coming into Canada, settling into places like Scarborough, they were coming in and making those classrooms more diverse. I remember being the only one at certain points in my schooling, but eventually there were more Chinese faces. And I would try to connect with them, but they were mostly speaking Cantonese amongst themselves. And I was the one that spoke Hakka. So here I was, not really feeling that I belonged to the Chinese group of kids, and then not really feeling that I belonged to the dominant Canadian group of kids. And I can certainly personally relate to that cultural dissonance that you described, that people like me who are even born here feel. They are torn between so many different cultures, and the impact of that on a child's psyche is so important to recognize. Now, you've both talked about young people and they're really driving change. So I actually want to ask Liam this. Liam, I'm wearing the gold ribbon, as Liam is as well. And that gold ribbon is part of a larger campaign, the Gold Ribbon Campaign. And I participated in a youth forum, and I gotta say the young people were just so incredibly articulate, and involved and engaged. So maybe I can turn it back to our MC just to tell us a bit more. And then I also wanna talk about mental health because there's a lot of initiatives, for example, happening at CCC. They're building a new garden. And I think important to think about is mental health and connectedness and mindfulness, and all those concepts can be done and achieved through so many different programs. And I want to go back to CCC, but I'm going to call Liam to talk about that, how the young people have really rallied around the Gold Ribbon Campaign.
I'm afraid Sean set the bar too high for really articulate, but we'll see if we can do that justice. Thank you, Sean, for mentioning the Asian Gold Ribbon Campaign and being a proud wearer of the Asian Gold Ribbon. Dr. Gina Wong started this initiative along with Sheila Wong. I guess it would have been in March of this year. And immediately the first thing that they thought to do was to include youth. Because I think the sad truth of the matter is that a lot of these experiences we're talking about, Sean, you and other panelists talking about being ashamed to bring your ethnic food for lunch, that's still happening, right? We had a panelist, and Sean, you'll remember this, this was, I believe, Jane, who said that she would try and speak English extra loud with her family when she was outside, and she would try and hide her dumplings and things like that because she was ashamed. And this is not decades ago. This is in the 2010s. This is still happening right now. And that's why when we started the campaign, one of the very first things that we did was to start a little hashtag and a filter which said, "I am proud to be Asian." Simple as that. Just a statement, just a symbol that I am proud to be Asian, and we don't have to be silent and kind of cope with this heritage. It can be, like we've all been saying, the center of kind of who you are. And so I'm so glad these conversations are happening, and to recognize that as much as we recognize them happening decades ago, sorry about that. As much as we recognize them having happened in the past, those kinds of issues are still happening now. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
And that's so important, Liam. And we certainly heard a lot of young people describe and tell their lived experiences of racism, of stereotypes, of discrimination. And when you juxtapose that against this dominant narrative that we have a model minority, and look at all the, the 90s and the academic success, it really creates this smokescreen that racial equality has been achieved when in fact it is not. And you can simply just ask a young Asian person in Canada today to talk about their lived experiences to determine that racism is alive and well, as all of you have articulately said. And all of this, the generational trauma, the current experiences, all of this is so troubling. Angela and Alan, you have worked so hard to acknowledge and to recognize Chinese culture and to make not only Chinese Canadians and Asian Canadians proud of who they are and where they come from, but to share that with the broader community. You have a garden project, and I was so honored this past week to announce federal funding of $2.8 million through the Investing in Canada program that's going right to CCC to help construct that garden and to enhance the facility overall. But can one of you or both of you actually speak about the importance of connectedness? Why do we need to know this for ourselves? How is that so important in the process of healing, but also in the greater project of sharing between cultures and to promote education? Alan, Angela?
I'm going to talk a little bit echoing Joseph, Liam, and Andy. Being an immigrant for many, many years, since 1975, I'm talking as a person rather than, I'm sure my board member would agree with what I'm about to say. Certainly that, like Andy said, that bamboo ceiling, there's glass ceiling exists everywhere. But to echo what Liam is saying, that I raised 3 kids and they are between 24 to 35. And being a parent, looking at their success in the community, in the society, in their workplace. But I talk to them all the time that in fact, when we have the Stronger Together program that launched in April, that my kids show very much interest of this program because they care. And I'm sure our younger generation care. We're taking baby steps, as what Joseph had mentioned, that this problem exists long time ago, before I came to Toronto in 1975. But I saw that things are gradually taking the right step in the right direction, but we still have a long way to go. That's why that I'm equally excited that thank you for the investment of the federal $2.8 million to help us to fulfill our dream to build an Asian garden. But this Asian garden, in our mind, is not a garden. It is a garden to include everyone else. It's a multicultural home for everyone. We want to showcase this as our culture of inclusiveness, and also we want to showcase our culture to the world, that we are not a closed door family. We want to open our arms to everyone. So it's a symbol that we open our arm to everyone, not only for our own community, but to multicultural and to everyone, including the Aboriginal people that we is in our plan. So we are very excited, but we're going to plan this carefully, and we like to invite many leaders like Dr. Joseph Wong and many others to put this together in the right way, so we can send a message out. So we are not going to rush the bulldozer, the backhoe to come in to dig a big giant gaping hole with no substance on it. So we will have a very representation of our culture in this very meaningful garden. And again, thank you for the federal investment. And Angela can also talk many programs that actually she have led in the last 12 months. And we find it very meaningful. We find that this is the only many steps that we could take. And it's a step of 1,000 miles to do this right.
Thank you. Angela, I'd love to ask you about, I know that CCC has had programs geared towards young people. Liam just gave an example, for example, of a young Asian person who has to purposely speak English louder, and that's to fit in. It's to fit in because racism has such a devastating impact on youth and on children that they feel they need to show that they are part of that dominant culture to belong. And you do important work at CCC to really instill in young Chinese community members that they ought to be proud and they be connected to their culture. After all, we are in Canada, a country where we celebrate that diversity and that multiculturalism. So can you talk about how important that work is in ensuring that next generation feels connected to who they are, their histories, their culture?
Well, it's interesting that maybe Angela, you want to comment? Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. I think it is very important that we let the young people speak out and to be heard, and to let them know that they are not alone in this, that we all know about what they are feeling and what they are going through. So in actual fact, before that, I'd like to acknowledge that I've been a fan of Dr. Wong and also of CPAC. For all the anti-Asian racism programs and initiatives that they have been running, even before pandemic. So as a matter of fact, CCC has, as Alan said, in April, formed the Stronger Together initiative, a project, which included like 15 different Asian organizations, and also youth orientated too. So Liam, perhaps after this webinar, we may be able to connect so that we could also include you in our Stronger Together project. And we like, I know through Dr. Wong's work that anti-racism is a sprint as well as a marathon. So some organizations, they focus on the sprint because it's necessary, that immediately there's the effect that people know what's happening. But as for the Stronger Together project, we focus on the marathon because it's a 2-year project. And like our goal is to promote hate, not promote hate, but to turn hate into harmony through education and social awareness. That's why we have included so many Asians from different ethnic groups to join us, because Asians, there are like about 50 different countries under Asia. So we should include all of them, not just Chinese, but all of them. So that's why we would like to include all the young people, hoping that they will have a platform to do their workshops, webinars, or share whatever they would like. And we will be there to fully support you, Liam, if you take the lead to do form some webinars or projects that would turn hate to harmony. All right?
Liam, I think you've just been recruited to a new project, and this is the wonderful thing about connecting together, because there are so many initiatives all across the country that we need to form those links and continue to work together. And you talked about young people, and I don't want to get so dark, but Andy, you talked about how young people of Asian descent have higher rates of suicide. Dr. Wong, you not only are a community leader who has been also a champion for seniors in the community, but you're a medical doctor. So I go to you, Dr. Wong. What would you say to families who have young people, you know, there's a lot of pressure because there are those dominant stereotypes that say, oh, if you're Asian, you must be good at math. You must be going into engineering. And those stereotypes are incredibly harmful for a young person who might be interested in politics or might be interested in art or want to pursue, the social sciences. What would you say as a doctor, someone who works with patients, but to families who have children, who have diverse interests, yet they're fitted into this mold of what they're expected to become and what they're expected to do with their lives?
Yeah, I think fighting discrimination, stereotyping, and racism, there are many faceted approaches because racism raises its head in many different areas. Many of you commented on the identity, and we certainly saw a very harmful because we, the young people, I mean our children, our grandchildren, growing up in Canada, they often have an identity crisis. It is more severe or more serious a few decades ago. Now, certainly a lot better, but not perfect. I think that it is the pride that we have to inject into our young people of who they are, or proud of their heritage, proud of their roots, and proud of who they are as a person. So I think that that is a very important area of work that we have to do. Secondly, education is the key to eradicating racism. So we really need to pair up and partner with our educators, our schools, the Ministry of Education in this area, and it is very important. Fighting stereotyping, I think that that is an area which is relatively subtle, but very difficult to fight. So we need to do a lot of media work, a lot of stereotypes are perpetrated by media, portrayal of who we are. I think that that is a big problem. And we not only that, we need to talk to the media bodies, we also need to talk to the advertisers. In the advertisement, they often stereotype certain minorities, and of course, a lot of advertisements stereotyping Chinese Canadians and Chinese Americans or Chinese anywhere for many, many years. I think that our own community have to also have to learn how to deal with this day and age. We cannot just mind our own business and hope that racism would go away. It will never go away. So speak up, call it out. I think that that is what we should do. Of course, we don't want you to confront racism and harm yourself in a way, but on the other hand, lie down and play dead or covering yourself with a carpet is not the answer. Lastly, but also very important, I think the government has a big role to play. Don't just give us lip service. I'm talking to all legislators, whether it be municipal, provincial, and federal. Lip service is no longer valid in the community. So for those hardcore racist, education probably would not bring us very far. I think that we have to have strong legislation against racism, and we also want different level of government to put it front and center. We know that anti-Asian racism is here today, it is here to stay, and it has been in Canada for centuries. And we just need to put it front and center in our anti-racism work, in our anti-racism legislation. Don't forget racism. We have been always taken for granted because we are silent, but we are no longer silent. We have to condemn it. We have to work together with politicians, our representatives in different levels. And if they don't work together with us, we need to vote them out. I think that that is very simple. That should be a very strong message from the Chinese Canadian community and other minority communities who have been under racist attack stereotyping and other types of discrimination in the workplace, in schools, out in the community, in the park. And we cannot let our seniors be assaulted anymore because of their skin color.
Dr. Wong, I hear you. I agree with you. I was thinking when you mentioned about the stereotypes, growing up, I remember kids coming up to me and saying, can you show us some Kung Fu? And they thought I knew Kung Fu. I had no idea how to do Kung Fu. And when I think about how that stereotype came to be, it's because of the representations of Asian men in the media. Growing up, there were only two representations. One is the Kung Fu master, Bruce Lee, and the other is the comical Asian who can, barely speak English or speak it with a very heavy accent. So you were either a joke or you were some Kung Fu master. And there were no other representations. And so I certainly see how the media culture, as you mentioned, can play an important role in shaping how minorities are viewed. And you talked about hate crimes, you talked about governments stepping up, and there's certainly a lot more work to be done. I want to go to Andy, because Andy, you mentioned the various initiatives that have been happening across the GTA and across the country. And one of the calls for action out there is that we strengthen hate crime legislation, that we ensure that hate crimes are able to be reported, and that when they are reported, that police forces across the country have the means, the knowledge, the supports available to address it. Andy, can you talk about that project, and why is it important for us to really tackle this also from the perspective of hate crimes?
I think there's a lack of attention to this issue. Number one, within the criminal code, it's mentioned, but if you look throughout the provinces, there's very unequal application of the law. And then there's very little guidance on how to prosecute such crime. And there's also difficulty in prosecuting because it's not the priority. If you can prosecute for other crimes, it probably will be, instead of being prosecuted for hate crime first. I think it should be first considered as a hate crime before you consider it something else. And then for a serious crime, you have to go to the Attorney General's office to get a permission to prosecute this as hate crime. And that's a very high barrier there. So there's a lot of work need to be done at the legislation and regulation level among all the governments. And there's also the online hate, and that's a very important part of hate crime, hate propaganda, and hate communication. I know the federal government is considering legislation on virtual space. It's important, the CRTC and all these other watchdogs. So the other part is our own community's reporting. So hate crime, hate incident is severely underreported because people have so much fear of repercussions. And there's also the convenience reporting. Our police services haven't made it easier for people who have language barrier to report a hate crime. And there really should be a reform within the police services to make it easier to be language accessible, and people have a sense of safety and acknowledgement. Some people that have done something, they never hear from them. And there's a Vietnamese Canadian lawyer in Vancouver, his name is Stephen Ngo. As a lawyer, when he was shouted at with racial slurs, he was like anybody else kind of froze there, right? You feel a little ashamed of being an Asian. And finally, a lot of people encouraged him to report. Then he realized the Vancouver police service have only one language there, which is Chinese. There's a firm there. He can't even report. So there are a lot of systemic issues that need to be addressed before people can report such crimes, and this crime can be prosecuted, and people can be brought into justice.
You know, I had to talk to my parents recently to remind them to be careful. To be careful just to, as they're going out for a walk, to be careful when they're going out to buy groceries. And thankfully, they're not doing much of that. Everyone's mostly staying indoors, but it's actually quite scary, the time that we are in right now, because for a long time, at least in my experience, we have seen racism that is against our Asian communities in less overt ways. In Western democratic context, we know that racism is institutionalized, it's systemic, it plays out in the less overt ways that you have seen in the past. And now we're hearing in the news, grandmas being punched in the face. We're hearing in the news, Asians in North America being spat on. And it almost feels like we are stepping back in time as this pandemic went on, and people are using overt, aggressive, physical attacks against members of the community. It's certainly a frightening time, and it goes to what Dr. Wong has said. We need to take action, and there needs to be concrete steps across all levels of government, within communities, with police forces, across provinces and territories. There needs to be a lot of work in the coming weeks and months to make sure that we take concrete action. I'm mindful of the time. I want to give the final comment to Angela and to Alan to wrap up this segment of our conversation. Angela, Alan?
Go ahead, Angela.
Thank you, Shaun, so much for giving us this platform to express what we feel. And certainly, I really believe in education and to build awareness in order to turn hate into harmony.
When you're closing that, I echo Dr. Wong said, I think we all have to step up, including the government, all three levels of government. And I'm seeing it, and I really encourage Shaun, through you, to continue to help us to fight these situations. Is to be ongoing, and we are always behind you if you do the right thing, of course. And you have been very much helping us as well. So let's work together as a team to fight these situations. And it's not going to be over tomorrow. And we will continue to work together.
Thank you very much. I would like to pass it back to Liam to formally thank our panelists. Liam, back to you.
All right. Thank you, MP Chen. And thank you again to our four panelists. Mrs. Angela Chan, Mr. Alan Lam, Andi, Dr. Joseph Wong. Thank you all four for joining this important discussion, but also I think for your leadership, truly, in all these areas. Thank you so much. Oh.
I think we can give them all a round of applause. Let's do that.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. My apologies, my Wi-Fi once again is having issues. But thank you all for once again. Next up, we have a multi-ethnic instrumental group, actually, led by Amelie Zhou on the erhu, which is a beautiful instrument. Can't wait to hear it. And Roa Lee on the gayugim. My apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. A traditional Korean plucked instrument with 12 strings, and Heidi Chan on the shinobu, a Japanese woodwind instrument. The group will be performing a piece called Picnic, composed by Roa Lee. I love that piece. Thank you, Emily, Roa, and Heidi for that. I'd now like to invite MP Shaun Chen to deliver some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Liam. Thank you so much, Liam. And once again, I would like to thank our amazing panelists for joining us today to celebrate Asian Heritage Month and to have a most meaningful conversation about anti-Asian racism. I want to take this opportunity, in fact, to share some of the work that has been happening at the federal level of government in terms of the work we are doing to combat anti-Asian racism discrimination here in Canada. Through our most recent budget, 2021, we have allocated $11 million to the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. And the work that they will do is to facilitate initiatives like establishing a national coalition that will support Asian Canadian communities. It will invest into collecting and look into the use of disaggregated data. And we've heard from our panelists today how important data is. Data is important in terms of understanding what is happening in the communities and to ensure that proper resources are allocated. We will continue as a government to take those concrete steps to confront anti-Asian racism and to empower communities to tackle racism in all its forms. One of the recent examples of how this data can be used to fuel initiatives is the report by the CCNC. As Dr. Wong mentioned earlier, the CCNC report did a study, and over a one-year period, they were able to log over 1,100 incidents of violence perpetuated against members of the Asian community in Canada. Staggering numbers, completely unacceptable, and it's something that has fueled a lot of the action that has been happening, including calls for change, a number of events that were held, at least I know in the Greater Toronto area, a rally at Toronto City Hall, and also a car rally at Queen's Park. These are very important events that I was able to participate in, but to really bring the community together and to highlight these important statistics and call for change. As we work together and tackle this important issue, we are now at the conclusion of Asian Heritage Month today, and I would like to invite all of you to continue learning, to continue participating in educational initiatives that honor the legacy of Canadians of Asian descent throughout Canadian history, the community that has worked hard to build Canada and is looking to continue to contribute to a country that is culturally diverse, that is a compassionate and prosperous nation in which we all must work together to build inclusion. As always, let us always be reminded of the values that connect us as Canadians: respect, freedom, inclusion. And it's so important that we work together to build an even better Canada each and every day. Now, before we end, I would like to take a moment to express my deepest gratitude to everyone who helped make today's event possible. First and foremost, can we give a round of applause to Liam for being an incredible MC for today's event? I'll tell you a little bit more about Liam. He's a third-year political science and history student at McGill. He is of Taiwanese and white Canadian heritage, and it's a reality that has fueled his passion for the cross-cultural dialogue that is so important when we talk about issues like racism and the work that still needs to be done. So thank you so much, Liam, for your efforts, for sharing your experiences, for speaking on behalf of youth. It is truly valuable and very much appreciated. Of course, I'd like to thank and acknowledge our incredible guest panelists, Dr. Wong, Andi, Alan, Angela, for joining today's discussion on Asian identity, on anti-Asian racism. Your voices in our Scarborough North community are incredibly important. And this year, I'm so pleased to have all of you be a part of this event and to honor and recognize the work that you continue to do. Thank you so much. I also want to acknowledge CCNCSJ for the PSA that we played earlier, the video, to Starlight Chinese Orchestra, which is also located in Scarborough North, for their wonderful performance by Kayla and Frederick, and the talented musicians, Imuli and Roa and Heidi. Thank you for sharing your incredible talents with the audience today. And finally, last but not least, I do want to acknowledge and thank my constituency office team, Amina, Brenda, Willa, and Winnie. You have made this event possible. They're behind the scenes folks, but they're making sure that the video is playing, that the invitations are sent out, and so much more. So thank you so much to my office team for their work and contribution to this. And I just want to say to all of you, thank you so much for being a part of our Asian Heritage Month event this year. I know that this year has been different. We usually have this event in person in various venues across the riding, but this year we have gone virtual. And I want to acknowledge the incredible sacrifice of everybody watching today. I know that many of you have been isolated. You have been staying home. You have been staying safe. Know that our government has committed to have your back throughout this pandemic, and we will continue to be there. Vaccines are rolling out. We are expecting 2.5 million doses each week in the month of June, and we're hoping to achieve that 2-dose summer by the end of the summer. So I know how difficult this has been, but I want to thank all of you. Not only have you been staying strong, but you have been dealing with issues like anti-Asian racism. And this is no easy time for the community. So please stay strong, stay safe. I hope you all stay informed and get vaccinated if you have not already. Thank you so much for your incredible work. And to all the participants, some of whom are also leaders in our community. There are so many here in the room, but I will just like to say to all of you, thank you for the work that you are doing to support our communities. We are truly in this together. So once again, thank you all. Let us all stay strong, stay safe, and stay healthy. And I wish you all, once again, a very happy Asian Heritage Month. Thank you. Merci.
And on that beautiful note, thank you everyone for joining. This concludes the end of the event.